So we're going to be exploring food, science, safety, and nutrition. My name is Jay Well. I'll sort of be your MC. Today, I'm from pre-college programs, but this is really a collaborative effort of pre-college programs, the OSU Food Science Department, and Oregon Ag in the Classroom, and kind of goes along with what we've been looking at as far as a number of our lessons have sort of looked at food and food safety. So if you're interested in this and these topics excite you, go back and look at our webpage with Virtual Teacher Professional Development, because there are some other activities out there that you could use for the same subject matter.
This is me. Okay, so I'm Sue Ann Bottoms. I'm the director of the pre-college programs, and just giving a little context for this work that we're doing. This is based on work from a grant from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. It's the National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and it's a SPECA grant. And just like a lot of professions, there's acronyms everywhere. So you can have NIFA, SPECA, but it's really the point of this grant is to promote and strengthen secondary and two-year post-secondary education in food and agriculture, natural resources, and create career awareness and readiness to strengthen the workforce. And in this particular grant, pre-college programs and the SMILE program are part of OSU, and then we're partnering with the College of Agriculture, and then particularly the Department of Food Science and Technology and Manufacturing, and Oregon Ag in the Classroom. So the students are from a class, and Dr. Lee, who I'll introduce, will talk about this class, and they've developed lessons related to that in their provide opportunities to talk to students. That was the intent. The intent was, as I said, was to deliver these lessons to teachers and students during spring term, but we had a little disruption this year. So we're doing this virtually. But they're undergraduates in Dr. Lee's class, and he's going to talk a little bit about the class and how he designed the assignments, and then they're created for middle school students, opportunity to communicate, and it's an opportunity for the undergraduates to be able to communicate their science to different audiences.
Excellent. Yeah, so as always, we're going to start out with a little bit of a NGSS connection, so you can keep these things in mind as we're talking through the lessons. Each one of the lessons the students have worked to connect to NGSS. And I've put some science and engineering practices that I think connect well here, and cross-cutting concepts. But all of these lessons are really about empowering students to make better decisions around what they are consuming. We'll be focusing on caffeine and sugar today in the different lessons. And so I think really when you look at the Oregon Distance Learning for All and what some of the auxiliary activities are, it's all about food choices and making healthy choices. And this, I think, can be a good stopgap that brings in some science, connecting again to NGSS, but also is really helping students and empower them to make healthier decisions. So with that, I'm going to introduce Dr. Glenn Lee, and he'll talk more about food science and start to introduce our student groups so you can hear about the lessons.
Yeah, so this is Glenn Lee from OSU. Now, the class I'm teaching this term, which involves all the students participated in a lesson plan development, is called Communicating Foods and Fermentation Science. And it's really geared towards training our students to be effective communicators, which is actually important, and that's really understated in many contexts. Because, well, communicating food science and factual knowledge about food is very important for a number of reasons, and I'm listing a few here, definitely not comprehensive. So food safety is definitely a big concern for public health and safety, and so we see periodic news that says, oh, we have an outbreak somewhere and we have product recalls, and these are of great concern of consumers. And why do you have these recalls, and what do they mean for industry and consumers are not necessarily well communicated. In the past, there are a lot of growing or increased awareness of nutrition and the importance of healthy diets. So within the United States, malnutrition is definitely still a problem, but if you look globally, malnutrition, the lack of access to nutritional food supply is actually a big problem. So raising awareness and think communicating the problem to the food industry and the public is quite important, and that's why we have these in our training for our students as well. And eventually, within democracy, public involvement in policy and regulation is also critical. So it's important that the general public, and more importantly, our future professionals in the food industry are aware of the key issues and are effective communicators. Because, well, as a matter of fact, I think, we as the professionals in this area are not doing enough, and we're conceding the narratives to people like whoever's on the next slides. I think I have a picture of her. Jay, could you? Yeah, that person. Yes. Maybe someone recognize this face. Can just show me a hand or type in chat. But Food Babe, yes. So Food Babe is kind of a celebrity and had a very big following. And she voiced a lot of concerns about food safety, the use of ingredients in food, which are not necessarily always justified from a scientific perspective. And I wouldn't necessarily call her a fearmonger per se, but I think it's critical that scientists or professionals in this area are also communicating. I want to bring up one example really quickly. So there is an additive. It's a foam stabilizer used in brewing called polypropylene glycol alginate. It's called PGA, and so it caught attention by the public because they said, well, polypropylene glycol is actually an antifreeze used in cars, and it causes cancer. So that raised all concern and also advocacy on brewers to release their full list of ingredients. But as a matter of fact, the PGA additive used in beer brewing has nothing to do with antifreeze in cars. So it was a really big misunderstanding there. And if the beer industry has been communicating more effectively, maybe that wouldn't happen. Can I go to the next slides? So another merit of introducing food science to middle school classrooms is it's highly engaging, and it connects to a wide variety of scientific concepts, ranging from chemistry, biology, engineering, and microbiology. If you take brewing and baking into consideration, and this is something that hasn't been done a lot for science education, but we see a lot of potential in that direction, particularly for sort of culinary interests, those who like chemistry, who like to explore, the sciences behind food. This is a good anchor point for them to steer them into a scientific discipline for their further education. Next slide. So a few examples on how food science can be super cool and engaging. I mean, you probably have played with oobleck before. And so the rheology of starch is heavily researched in food science. It's a very important phenomena that's useful in food processing. You're seeing avocado because almost all commercially sold avocados are coated with protecting films. And so there are a lot of companies in this realm that works on sustainable packaging where bio-based polymers can be coated on avocado so that it stays fresh longer. Because as a matter of fact, avocado is not a very durable food after all. And brewing, right? So there are a lot of chemistry, biochemistry, and microbiology research that went into advancing the science of brewing. And maybe that's another anchor point where students may say, oh, hey, maybe I want to study the science in beer. And that can elicit their interest in a new way. I think those are my slides. So I want to open this up to everyone in the room, and I can type in chats or start commenting on, well, do you have any any past experience in integrating food science into your classroom already? I'd like to hear your experience. Do you want to add something to this, Jay?
Yeah, no, I think we're, you know, before we get into the lessons, just thinking about, you know, we just want to see what ways are you already bringing food science into your classroom, and if you are doing that, how are you doing it? You know, as we'll be part of this SPECA grant is to continue to develop lessons over the next couple of years, and so we're always trying to figure out what teachers are already doing so we can build on that. It's easier to connect to the classroom if we know what you're doing in the classroom.
So I see a question in the chat. Will the SPECA grant eventually ramp up to include high school curriculum lesson options? Maybe Sue-Ann, you want to address this?
I did in the chat. Yeah,
Oh,
we'll
okay.
have some high
Just saw
school.
that.
We'll have, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So take it from that you know, I'm not seeing a lot of anything in the chat here that maybe food science isn't something that you're currently utilizing in your classroom. So we do have 3 lessons that can give you a way to start building that into your classroom that's going to connect to STEM, but also connect to food science and really bring that to your students. So Glenn, you want to introduce the students?
Sure thing. Yeah. So we have 3 groups of students, each working on different type of lessons. So I'll introduce the first group first. Brooke, Mary, and Susie has been developing a lesson plan appropriate for middle schoolers on energy drinks and adolescent health. I probably won't release too much spoilers, but this is an engaging topic, hopefully, because we're dealing with a new generation who have new eating and drinking habits. And the goal is to raise more awareness in this topic. So with that, I'll leave it to the students then. All right.
So good afternoon, everyone. Our presentation is about energy drinks and how they affect the adolescent health. So over the last 20 years or so, the consumption of energy drinks has skyrocketed amongst the general population, but especially among teenagers. So most energy drinks that you can find in the stores have really bright and flashy and colorful packaging with really exciting names like Monster or Rockstar or Amp or Bang. And this is with the intent of marketing them towards young people. So, and energy drinks are also sold as dietary supplements and not as a food. So unlike soda, there's no regulation on how much caffeine can go into a energy drink. So that keeping that in mind, there also is the long-term effects of caffeine, especially excessive caffeine consumption, has not been studied. So this is what prompted us to create this presentation, so we can hopefully engage a younger, impressionable audience who is probably drinking these energy drinks.
So we've created some learning objectives for the lesson. After the lesson, we hope that students will be able to understand what an energy drink is, which includes an overview of what the main ingredients are and their function. So looking into the nutritional facts panel and things like that. Students will be able to understand a general overview of what caffeine is and how it can affect their physical and mental health. And students should be able to understand that the consumption of energy drinks in moderation is important to consider. We are not aiming to try to convince them to stop drinking energy drinks or to not. We just want them to understand that moderation is important. So we're hoping students will be able to contextualize the information in our lesson, because the science in the lesson builds on basic science of the human body and topics related to health. These sciences have, the students have already been exposed to them. We'll also be using graphics like that are shown here that, you know, use arrows and circles and graphics that are easier to digest. And by discussing energy drinks and caffeine, these are things that middle schoolers are very familiar with, and if they aren't, they've definitely heard of them. So they'll be able to learn the information and relate it to their past and current experiences. Addressing the next generation science standards, the topic that we're covering is science and engineering, the obtaining, evaluating, and communicating information. We think our lesson plan adheres to the DCI structure and function. We're talking about the way caffeine is used in their body, and we kind of relate it to the structure and function of the human body. And then the CCC, cause and effect, we talk about the caffeine, the consumption, and then the effect that it has on their body.
All right, so some lesson logistics. Our lesson plan should take about 45 minutes from start to finish. Materials that you'll need, a worksheet will be provided. You'll need to obtain countable objects such as dried pasta, beans, M&Ms, beads, anything that you could count and sort into the next item, which is the clear cups, which is you'll see is to identify the different amounts of caffeine per type of caffeinated beverage we're going to look at. And then you'll need an internet-enabled device for some research. Okay, so there's 3 provided resources that we have created. The first is a PowerPoint presentation. It's got images and text and everything that the students will need for the information on the worksheet and to do the next item, which is the Kahoot. So Kahoot is like an online quiz where students can submit their answers online, and it's a fun way to see, to engage the students and talk about some of their personal experiences with energy drinks without, having breakout conversations, just asking them questions like if they drink energy drinks, what their opinions on, stuff like that. And then there's the worksheet, which will have a research activity, a group activity, and a hands-on activity. The research activity is actually the students picking one energy drink that they either have consumed, know about, or they just decided that they wanted to look into. Looking into the nutritional panel facts, finding out which one of the ingredients has to do with caffeine or energy or anything of that sort, and then discussing their findings with their peers around them. The group activity is the next thing that'll happen, and that is looking while you're doing the presentation. There's a list of different beverages that are caffeinated, looking at those, seeing what the differences in the caffeine amount is, and having them write it down and actually physically get into what they're doing. And then the final thing is a hands-on activity where they're going to use those countable objects in the cups to look at the things that they learned in the group activity and sort the beans as like 1 bean equals 1 milligram of caffeine in that drink.
So we mentioned we have created a Kahoot, and we know some teachers are familiar, but we know some are not. So just a brief overview of Kahoot. So when you click on the link we've provided, you'll click play. There are 2 options if you're teaching a class over Zoom or in person where you want everybody to be engaged at the same time. You'll click teach. If you're assigning it for a student to complete the lesson at home, like for a virtual situation like this term, you can do assign and then they can go through it on their own time. From there, you'll click classic. That means that's 1 student to a device. This is if you're teaching it in one group setting. That means 1 student to 1 device. They're answering their own questions. This is ideal because the point of it is to get feedback on where the students are at. And so you want feedback from each individual. And then important down below with the exclamation point, it requires you to put a nickname in for when you begin. Just turn the friendly nickname generator on. They are middle schoolers, and so that'll help avoid any inappropriate nicknames.
Okay, so after completing this entire lesson, students will hopefully have gained new knowledge and insight on how consuming energy drinks affects their body, especially their growing bodies. And this will be detailed in some slides on the PowerPoint that will have some examples of physical and mental health effects due to caffeine consumption. And the research activity will also help them gain some knowledge on how energy drinks affect their body, because they will be going through and they will be researching in depth the ingredients of a energy drink of their choice, which leads me into the next outcome. Students will hopefully learn the contents of an energy drink and the purpose of the ingredients and the additives. And this will be done through the research activity. Like I said, they'll be writing down every ingredient and then researching the purpose of some of these ingredients. And then they'll be coming back with their classmates and comparing and contrasting the different energy drinks that they've chosen. And then the hands-on activity will help them visualize and contextualize how much caffeine is actually in these energy drinks. And then the final takeaway that we want to send the students home with is that consumption in moderation is very important. And this outcome can actually be measured in a way. At the beginning, we mentioned that we'd have a discussion or a Kahoot where we'd ask the students if they are consuming energy drinks. If so, how often, how much, like what brands, et cetera, and then coming back at the end of the lesson with a Kahoot where we can sort of survey the students and ask them, like, so after this lesson, has this changed your mind? Like, for example, if you're drinking an energy drink every single day, maybe this will help you consider or encourage you to cut back on that and maybe only have 1 or 2 energy drinks a week, especially since it's unreasonable to ask students to completely stop drinking energy drinks anyways. I mean, I drink energy drinks. So moderation is definitely our main takeaway here. And so during or by the end of this lesson, students may have some other questions about energy drinks or how they affect their body or just caffeine in general. So here I've compiled a bunch of resources, some information from reputable sources that anyone can access at any time. And teachers, you guys can go through and read these and hopefully give yourself some new knowledge that will help you answer any questions that students may have during the lesson. And that's the end of our slides. So if you guys have any questions, feel free to ask.
You can either unmute yourself or put your questions in the chat. So as you all were putting together this lesson, what was like the craziest thing that you found about energy drinks that teachers might not know?
So we had a paper component part of this class that we're taking, and I actually ended up writing my paper on how energy drinks affect young people. And I think the thing that surprised me the most is how little we know about caffeine and how it affects us, especially in the long term. There are very few animal studies and there are no human studies. That was what I found most surprising when putting together this presentation and the paper that I wrote.
Susie, I was going to say something similar. I also wrote my paper on a very similar topic. And there are lots of studies in the last 20 years that have looked into caffeine from soda with children, but there have been none, especially in the last 10 years when energy drinks have become so popular with students or adolescents and young adults with specifically highly caffeinated beverages like energy drinks. So my conclusion for my paper was basically that there needs to be more research because it's hard to compare the studies that use the soda with caffeine in energy drinks with students now.
And so when you're comparing the two, what, like, in a normal can of soda and a normal can of energy drink, how much more caffeine is in an energy drink?
Yeah, a soda is capped at 75 milligrams per serving, which a serving is about 12 ounces, I'm pretty sure. And energy drinks, because they're regulated as a dietary supplement and not a food, they can get up to, I know Bang has 350 milligrams of caffeine easily. So
if I can add to that, the energy drink with the most caffeine on the market, I believe, I think is sold in Europe or in the United Kingdom, and it's called King Energy, and I think it has half a gram of caffeine in it, so 500 milligrams, which from what we researched is at least 5 times more than a cup of coffee.
Wow.
Yeah, Dan, you bring up a good thing in the chat. Energy drinks are really accessible. If they're not in vending machines, they're at convenience stores that are a walkable distance from middle schools and high schools that students can very easily get to.
Well, thank you all very much. I think we're going to move on to the next group. If any questions come up with this group, we're going to have a slide at the very end where you can ask your sort of final questions. So hold on to those. But thank you all very much.
So I think this is my turn again. So the second group will be talking about how sugar content in beverages affects on human health, briefly how it's been associated with different diseases that are found via chronic consumption of sugary beverages. So I'll leave it to Melanie, Ivan, Said, and Trump. Okay.
All right, hello everyone. And as Glenn mentioned, we'll be talking about sugar content in beverages that elementary school and middle school students are commonly consuming. And I think Jay asked a question at the beginning of the meeting that ties in perfectly of has our consumption increased since quarantine? So obviously this is a very prevalent issue with all of us, but especially focusing on middle school. So as I mentioned, we will be talking or targeting this lesson to 6th through 8th grade, so middle school, and mainly focusing on chemical reactions in the everyday life by looking at how sugar affects solution in beverages, and this should take about 45 to 60 minutes for the students. So for our NGSS, or Next Generation Science Standards, the 3 ones that we focused on were scale, proportion, and quantity, through looking at how different concentrations of the amount of sugar in a solution affects the taste and how that might be perceived to consumers. And then for structure and function, allowing students get hands-on experience with different types of sugars and how that plays into how that food is produced, and also why a manufacturer might choose one sugar over the other. And then system models, again, looking at beverages as an entire system and sugar as a component of that.
And so sugar is found in everything. I mean, if you go into your pantry or go to the store and look at the back of a panel and look at the ingredients, you'll find sugar is basically in anything that's processed. And if we think about it, sugar has a long history. And it began as sugar cane as the world's first cultivated sugar. And it spanned back way to the Common Era. And it's been through a lot. And so it wasn't until the spice trade that sugar became a popular commodity in the West. And today you can find a lot of different types of sugar, ranging from natural sugars like lactose in milk to artificial sweeteners like Splenda or stevia. But the one we know and we all use is table sugar, and that's known as sucrose. And it's a popular added sugar used in a lot of food and beverages in today's products just because of how cheap it is and how versatile it is. And besides for taste, sugar is used in a lot of food and beverage products to help with formulation. And while we may think that's simple, it plays a large role in such a complex system in both our bodies and the food we eat. And so the objectives we laid out for the students here is we're using the Next Generation Science Standards to help them understand a little bit as to why and how sugar is used in their beverages. And so this lesson plan illustrates how different types of sugars taste and react in water based on their structure and function, the proportion of concentration of sugar found in the fruit juice, and how sugars are either enhanced or diluted in taste when compared between water and fruit juice, which will help illustrate system modeling just because of how complex the food system is.
So we split this activity into 2 parts, and the first activity plays with mostly different types of sugar, and we designed this so that students could do it at home over Zoom, or also it could be adapted to a classroom. So the main materials that you need is fruit juice, which can easily be found in most fridges at home, but also just a quick trip to the store. Clear cups for the purpose of measuring, and then we use a few different types of sugar, but leave it open to the student to choose. So they could use cane sugar, brown sugar, corn syrup, stevia, honey. The main emphasis there is using different types, so you can understand the sweetness in different amounts. And then also water, and throughout the lesson plan, there are weight measurements, but it can also be used for measuring cups. So we included both units there. So as I mentioned, the students will pick 3 different types of sugar using the same amount with the same amount of water, and then just noting overall taste, and then also ranking the sweetness of each of them compared to plain water and compared to fruit juice, just to kind of get an understanding of how they will taste differently in water and how that might be perceived differently, and also lets them rationalize their thought process and kind of make note of what they're understanding.
Okay, for the second activity, we're focusing in comparing sugar concentration and present the idea to the student and how concentration will affect the taste of the solution. So for this activity, we will ask students to mix any type of sugar with water, but the sugar must be the same type. And they will make a 5%, 25%, and a 50% solution. Mix it well, and can we, next slide? Thank you. So, and then after that, we will ask them to circle the sweetness ranking after the activity is done.
Okay, so from those activities, the students should have understand the chemical composition of the solute and the solvent. So, and also they can interpret the significance of the amount of sugar that they added to the solvent, which is water, and the effects of the amount of sugar added to the sweetness level of the sugar solution. So they should have come up like the hypothesis, the higher the amount, the higher the sweetness level. And after that, they should have be able to compare the sugar that they have measured to the fruit juice sample that they have. So from there, they can like compare like how many sugar content that they have in their fruit juice and on their daily beverage consumption.
And so, as simple as sugar may seem to all of us, it's actually quite complex the further we dive into it. It's kind of like a rabbit hole when we jump into it. And so, hopefully, this lesson plan will help students understand a little bit of the iceberg when it comes to something that they come into contact with every day. And if not, hopefully, they'll walk away with being a more health conscious consumer about consuming what they buy.
One of the things about this lesson, I think that is really will engage kids is they can do it in the kitchen with their families. And because one of the things that we know when we're working with kids around science, they have this image that science is something that happens in a lab or somebody else does it, and not have that understanding is science is everywhere. It's in the kitchen, it's part of their food, that how food is made, how food is marketed to them. And I think this does it in a really simple way, and it connects them to things that they do every day, like drinking soda pop or drinking juice or whatever, and making the connection that there's somebody, except for the fruit juice, well, it comes from fruit, but then the processing of it and how it gets changed. And I think one of the extensions easy to do to this kind of lesson is really then just looking in the cupboard to see how many different things have sugar in it. It's not just their fruit juice and the drinks.
Exactly. And to answer one of the questions in the chat, there are very thorough instructions in the lesson plan on how to make the different solutions. As I mentioned earlier, it's either in measuring cups, so like a tablespoon or a teaspoon, and then either in weight measurements if they have a scale at home.
And all of the lessons are on the website where you, when you registered, you have access to all of that. Well, even if you don't register, you have access to all of it.
Yeah, they're not up there currently, but they will be up there
They will
by
be.
the end of the week. So if you look for them right after this, you're not going to find them, but trust me, they'll be up there by the time this recording's up there. So same question I asked the last group, as you were going through this and looking at specifically sugar and sugar content and different things, was there anything that like really surprised you about maybe something that you're currently consuming that you didn't realize either had sugar or had as much sugar in it?
I don't think so. When we started brainstorming ideas for this, we wanted to do broader focus on like energy drinks and coffee drinks, and kind of just get that awareness from students of everything has sugar in it, and a lot of it sometimes. But we kind of narrowed it down to fruit juice because we thought this would be very specialized and focused. But I think there's a lot of room for experience.
So we had a comment on here that condiments always surprised me in the terms of sugar content, and yeah, I'm always surprised, especially when you look at grams of sugar or grams of added sugar. it's an amount that when you actually see what a gram of sugar is, it's pretty surprising. Thinking too about connections, you mentioned around thinking about energy drinks and coffee. It seems to me that caffeine and sugar go very well together. They seem to follow each other. And so all these lessons are interconnected in that way. So again, we'll have more questions at the end. We're going to move on to group C now.
Okay, so Group C's topic is on caffeine and human health with a stronger health focus to it. So the lesson plan developed by Ben, Carter, and Jasmine. So Ben, Carter, due to schedule conflict, they're not able to attend the Zoom meeting today, but Jasmine is here towards the end if we were to answer questions. But this is actually a pre-recorded presentation from the third group of the day. So Jay, go ahead.
Hi everyone, we're here to cover our lesson plan about caffeine and human health. This is targeted at middle schoolers, so sort of the 11 to 13 or 14 range. Let's get started. So next slide. All right, so kind of the goal of this is to introduce students to the effects that caffeine can have on their bodies and their health. This could be a great exposure to the scientific process. Obviously, for younger students, this might be one of the first times that they're doing this, but especially with 8th grade, it may be a repetition or a reintroduction to that process. And it's really important to bring up this topic because caffeinated drinks, especially other than coffee, are heavily marketed to kids, teenagers. Something like 73% of kids consume caffeine daily. And it's also been noted that kids and adolescents are more affected by the undesirable side effects of caffeine, like anxiety, diarrhea, and dehydration. So teaching kids those negative impacts, as well as what amount of caffeine they should be intaking, is definitely an important thing when you're tying it into human health. All right, next slide. So obviously the goal with human health, and this could be structured around a health class, would be learn what caffeine does to the body, what positive effects, obviously everyone knows that there's the energy boost and the mental boost, negative effects as well, the crash later, dehydration, increased anxiety. There are other synergistic things in caffeinated beverages, soda, energy drinks, namely, that can have more severe and adverse effects, especially in children and teens. So helping educate about that is really important. Next slide. So again, this could be a really good chance to introduce students to the scientific process and how that all works. We outline our idea for doing a heart rate test with cups of coffee. So this is a great opportunity to show at least the experimental part of the scientific process. There's especially when this is adapted for Zoom, there's still the opportunity for engaging in data collection. It also gives the opportunity to form a hypothesis and explain, what an unsupported hypothesis is versus a hypothesis that is supported by your data.
So like Ben said, we tried to design a lesson in a way that would be easy to adapt to Zoom and also a physical classroom, especially in this time of remote learning. So we planned for a 15-minute lesson that incorporates an experiment to see the effects of caffeine and also activities for students to engage with the content. So I'm going to walk through the overall lesson plan and then go into detail about the heart rate experiment and polling questions as well. So a lot of the details I'm referring to are also available in our written lesson plan, and that's going to be made available to all of you. First, we came up with a few ideas to increase student involvement, one being a student survey. You can send out a caffeine consumption survey ahead of time so you can get a feel for how many students consume caffeine regularly and if there are specific caffeinated beverages that they drink, for example, coffee versus energy drinks. You will also need to recruit some adult volunteers for the heart rate experiment, and this will get clear as I go into detail on the next slide. But to start off the lesson, we have a short background section in our lesson plan that can be used as an introduction. You can answer basic questions and establish that caffeine is considered a drug that basically tricks your brain into thinking it's not tired. You can explain some of the health effects, particularly for kids. Many students might not know that caffeine can affect their sleeping habits, appetite, and even change their mood. Additional resources are also available on our lesson plan that provide background about caffeine and its effects. So the purpose of the heart rate experiment is to see the effects of caffeine in real time. Essentially, you'll ask adult volunteers to measure their resting heart rate, drink 6 ounces of black coffee, and then after 15 minutes, measure their heart rate again. Heart rates can be measured easily by finding your pulse on your wrist, counting the number of beats in 15 seconds, and multiplying by 4. With remote learning, guardians may be able to join the student on the call to participate if they are able to brew coffee at home. In a physical classroom, you could also have adult volunteers, or you might need to pre-collect data, which we'll explain a little bit later. But ideally, you'll have a larger sample size of 30. A table with sample data is provided in the lesson plan. When introducing the experiment, you can talk to students about experimental design. You can ask for their hypotheses and also talk about the idea of controls. Why is it important that participants drink the same amount of coffee? You can also ask questions like, does the method of preparing coffee matter? Or do you think the effect will be different for someone who drinks coffee every day compared to someone who never drinks coffee? You can also show the results in Excel, and if your students are at that level, you can do simple analyses of the data, including mean, median, range, and etc. During this 15-minute waiting period, or you can wait longer if you want, you may choose to incorporate polling questions into the lesson using something like Poll Everywhere, or Kahoot, or even the polling feature on Zoom. You can ask questions like, does 1 can of Red Bull have more or less caffeine than a 16-ounce coffee? These questions can lead to discussions on other components of caffeinated beverages as well, sugar being a really big one. One question we really wanted to emphasize is shown on the screen. Ultimately, we hope students will use this information to inform their caffeine consumption choices. And Kyler is going to go further into the outcomes of the lesson.
So from this lesson, that we hope that students will be able to describe this cause-effect relationship between caffeine and heart rate, be able to have a conversation about the importance of the scientific method when exploring the unknown, explain similarities and differences between various caffeinated beverages, as well as be able to make a connection between the lesson material and their own habits, be able to use the lesson to make informed decisions on what may be healthy or otherwise. Along with these anticipated outcomes, we know that there can be some pitfalls with remote learning. So we'll go to the next slide. And these include data collection, statistical integrity, and student engagement. Like was mentioned previously by Jasmine, the ideal sample size for this lesson would be around 30 people. So what we recommend for data collection is to get a pre-collected data, either from family volunteers, or maybe just outsource and be able to look some information up and provide data to the students prior. And then in order to keep student engagement, we hope that you can use these polling questions that we mentioned earlier, such as, will the participant's heart rate decrease, stay the same, or is coffee, or increase after drinking coffee? Propose questions like, why is there variation and change in heart rate? This gives the students something to be able to focus on while they're waiting for that 15-minute time period during the heart rate experiment. And these, as long as with other recommended polling questions, are in the lesson plan document made available with this presentation. We hope that you found this information interesting, and if you have any questions, we are available for contact.
So does anybody have any questions for this? Jasmine is here to answer your questions. So, all right, go ahead.
Oh, I was wondering, what would be a good class size? Do you think they'll make those experiments work out well? Any recommendations?
From talking to our mentor, we know that there's about 30 students per class, but I think that it really doesn't matter how many students there are as long as there's enough data and enough adult volunteers. And especially with like the pre-collected data, like I even did this experiment on myself and it was really easy. So you could ask people to help you out in that way.
Thanks.
And then how did you guys choose coffee compared to another caffeinated beverage?
I think this could be done with any caffeinated beverage, but we just thought that coffee was something accessible for a lot of families, so it would be easy to do in this remote learning environment.
So you mentioned you did this to yourself. What sort of data did you see when you did this?
So my heart rate increased from 60 beats per minute to 72 after only 15 minutes. So it was I never realized that there was that big of an effect even on myself. So I think this would be really valuable for students.
So you know, some people say like when they drink coffee, they sort of get the jitters and maybe they've drank too much coffee at that point. You just mentioned that you didn't notice any change with just that small amount of coffee. Do you try anything where you maybe drink a lot of coffee and then saw if you like continue to see an increase and what that increase was?
I haven't explicitly measured my heart rate, but I do know like personally when I drink too much coffee that like my hands might start sweating and like I get that jittery feeling too. So for sure you could change the amount of coffee and maybe look at how that affects people as well.
Did the rest of the folks in your group try it?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
Do you think that knowing the effects on yourself, will that influence your choice?
Oh yeah, I think it does. It's made me a lot more aware of like how much coffee I consume and like the factor or the things that are happening in my body that I don't notice.
And do you think it'll have an effect on students, specifically middle schoolers? Do you think that they'll analyze their intake after this?
I'd hope so. I think it would be really effective if their parents were with them and like partaking in this experiment. We didn't want to encourage students really to drink coffee and like participate themselves, but I think like seeing it happen in real time to someone they know would have an effect on them.
So I saw a question in the chat channel about potential liability. And so this has been addressed before in educational setting via waivers, and those waivers have to be signed by both the students and their parents or supervisors. Well, if we are using the data for publication or research or in any way, will the data be identifiable, then that necessitates a more complex approval process. But yeah, I can explain that.
Well, and as part of this lesson, the students did prepare pre-collected data that your students could use for the data part of it.
Yeah, we only had like 5 or 6, like a sample size of 5 or 6, so you would probably need more, but it's a good start.
So I have a question for the teachers out there. Do you see your students, especially if you're a middle school teacher, do you see middle school students, are they consuming energy drinks or caffeinated or sugary beverages in, at lunch or at school? I got a resounding yes, all day long. So it's to me, it's really interesting of why they start to make those choices. And ideally lessons like the ones that you just heard of start to get them thinking about the consequences of what those decisions are and maybe walking back on some of them. Yeah, I remember when I was in high school and they had a coffee cart in high school, and they actually had to shut it down because students were drinking so much coffee that families complained. But this is before there was widespread energy drinks around as well. So yeah, I imagine it's a fairly big challenge in schools. So we're coming up to the end. See, look at this. There was a smoking room in 1986. We have come a long way. Who knows? Maybe energy drinks and caffeinated beverages will be outlawed in high schools in the near future. So as always, too, we want to talk about distance learning modifications and questions. I think these lessons, the students really were thinking about how could, in creating the lesson, of how could it be utilized for distance learning. And so hopefully that's pretty clear there. But I thought too that maybe we could be sharing some of the challenges that we're having with distance learning, either from the students who created the lessons. I mean, you were doing this all virtually, so everything that you all did about putting these lessons together was done virtually, or from Glenn, who was teaching the class, or from other teachers out there who are kind of in the end of this round of distance learning. What were some of the challenges you had, and what sorts of modifications did you bring? I like the idea of taking information from family members that normally drink caffeinated beverages. I know my kids could be doing that to me. They could be doing I could be their test subject. Any thoughts on distance learning modifications that you have gone through? We're likely to go back to some sort of hybrid distance learning in the fall. So being able to be thinking about those and sharing those, I think, is a good way to prepare. I like connecting science to everyday activities, project-based ideas, and some of our first couple lessons in this virtual professional development series were all about were more project-based, and so definitely check those out. So we're about 1 minute until 1 o'clock. I want to thank everybody for attending. I really want to thank the students for their hard work in putting together some really great lessons. Please utilize those lessons. Make sure they're getting out in front of students. And thanks to Glenn for working with us to make that a part of his class, even with the last minute changes due to the closing of school. If you registered through Ideologic, you are going to get a PDU. If you don't get one, please email us at precollege@oregonstate.edu. Or if you have any other questions about our virtual teacher professional development series or any of the curriculum that you can find on our website, I encourage you to check it out. We do have one more session next Tuesday from 10 to 11. It is on alien genetics. It's a really fun activity that we've done for both elementary and high school teachers, so it's widely adaptable. I encourage all of you to be there next Tuesday from 10 to 11. So thank you so much for attending, and we'll hopefully see you next week.